God, thank you. Um, hey, everybody. It's good to be here this morning. I thank God for His goodness, and I thank God for each one of you. It's a pleasure to open up the Word of God to study what God has for us this morning in the Lord's Academy. So we're in the book of Esther. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to the book of Esther. We started on that as we finished up Ezra. After we finished up Ezra, we said we're going to go here and then we're going to go back to the book of Nehemiah, because as the first slide indicates, when we place this in the chronology of events, that nearly 4 years, well, when we place this in the chronology of events, Esther comes on the scene 60 years after the decree of Cyrus, and approximately 35 years before Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall. So, as we stated last Sunday, when we're talking about Esther, when you look at the story, and if you would notice, if you've read it before or you're reading it now, that God is never mentioned in the book. However, we see the hand of God or the providence of God throughout the book. And that's something, isn't it? That you're able to see how God worked everything that happened in the book of Esther for the good of his people. And so it talks about the premise of the book is that there were Jews that stayed there, that were still there in Babylon. And so it talks about the persecution of those who were there, those who remained there, who did not go back under Cyrus's decree. And I said persecution because if you have somebody that's out to exterminate you, to me, that's the type of persecution that they don't want to see you live. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, and that is in the form of Hamon. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Esther, and let's go to Esther chapter 2. So nearly now 4 years have passed. You remember we talked last Sunday how King Ahasuerus had a queen, and the queen ended up being deposed because she would not obey him by coming to show off her beauty to his friends. He really basically tried to objectify her, just as this is an object, and this is my queen. This is what I got. And so she refused to come, and because of that, he banished her. And so now time has passed, but now he's missing a queen. And so his advisors began to advise him, and they put on a search for someone that would become the queen, someone that would now the queen. He doesn't have just a queen; he has other women too. So then he has a harem of women, but then there's one queen. Okay, so if you look at it like a harem, every night he would have a new partner. And the next morning, she would join the rest of the concubines. And so the one that pleased him the most then would become his new queen. So at chapter 2, when we look at chapter 2, then we're introduced to another character. And that character, Brother Curtis, is Mordecai. So if you look at this, let's look at Esther chapter 2. And let's just start there. After these things, those things that went on between Vashti and the king and putting her away, so there was some time that had elapsed between what we talked about last Sunday and now. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what he had done and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, his advisors, let there be a fair young virgin sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. And let the maiden which pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. And we're going to see Mordecai is going to be central to this story in Esther. Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah. Remember, Hadassah is the same as Esther. He brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. So if it's his uncle's daughter, what does that make Mordecai and Esther? Cousins. So they're cousins. But he raised her as his daughter. That makes them cousins, but he raised her as his daughter. Okay, and so she was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took her for his own daughter. So when we look at life in Babylon, or those persons who remained there, Babylonian life was made difficult for the Jews. The Persians then, they were more lenient to aliens. And many Jews, when we talk about it, because we talk about a lot how, even though they were in Babylon, how some of them set up businesses and how many of them prospered, even though they were over in Babylon, how some of them really did good. And so when you look at Mordecai eventually held a position, an official position in the government, and he sat at the king's gate. So if you look over at chapter 2, verse 21, you'll see that in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. That's going to come into play in just a minute. So what I want you to realize, though, is that a key element in this story for Mordecai and for Esther is that the people in Shushan didn't know that they were Jews. The people in Shushan did not know that they were Jews. They found out about Mordecai when he told them, and we'll see that over in chapter 3 and verse 4. And the king learned about Esther at the second banquet that she hosted for him and Hamon. So let's talk about it. What do you think were the advantages and disadvantages of them concealing their identity? Anybody? Advantages and disadvantages of them concealing their identity. Or they're concealing their true nationality. Let me say it like that.
The advantage, obviously, would be
Can it-
you got a microphone. We'll get on your job. Teacher, obviously, the advantage would be not being persecuted for being a Jew. Now, the disadvantage, I don't know.
So I'm thinking, let's just talk it out. Let's talk it out. Okay, so if no one knew that they were Jews, do you think they were doing anything that would be considered Jewish? You know what?
In other words, they weren't keeping the law, the ordinances, anything like that. They weren't right.
Yes, yes. So it.
But you know what? That could be, or it could be that they just weren't paying them any attention, that they were separated. Because I know in my life, as being black and most of the folks I work with being white, they don't know nothing about my life and don't care. They could care less, you know. Until maybe there's some money involved in it or something. We live in two different worlds.
Okay, just something to think about. Just something to think about. Of course, as you said, advantages. Of course, they wouldn't be persecuted, but you know, to me, if you think about it, have you ever heard about people like passing? Okay, so advantages would be so that they could take advantage of all of the other things the majority of the population takes advantage of.
And I think, you know, the big deal now is about who's a racist and who's not. And, you know, I don't think you have to be a racist. There's such a thing as white privilege, you know. And that's the reason I say you can't compare our plight with the plight, maybe say, of other people, because the first thing you see when you see somebody is their color. And so you automatically get identified, you see? But if you are like Russian or this or that or whatever and everything, you, like I said, you could pass. You're white. But by being black, first thing I see is your color. And so you're pegged. And there is, I believe, something called white privilege.
Okay.
Where in the law we have what you call a presumption until it's proven otherwise. And I just think that if you're white, there's a presumption of certain things about you. And if you're black, there's a presumption.
Absolutely.
And most of us never overcome that. I hadn't been able to overcome it in 64 years, that they just presume. As hard as we work, you lazy. It's hard, you know, just negative. It's usually all negative. So.
Okay. So it's just something to think about. Let's read some more about that, and then we'll see how Mordecai and Esther, how it all fits together. So and let's look at, we're in chapter 2 and verse 8. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification. One thing, now we can begin to see the hand of God in everything. Esther found favor. Esther found favor in Shushan. We read about how, when we talk about God's providence and how God works things out, isn't it something how, even in the midst of what we would consider a bad situation, how God's people can still find favor. And it's not because of anything that they've done. It's simply because God grants favor. Because God grants a favor. Because if you think about it, like I just said, if they are concealing their true nationality, that's like denying who you are. How could God find favor in that? Well, he can, because he's God. How can God grant you favor, rather, in that? He can, because he's God. And so she found favor in Shushan, and Haggai the eunuch, who was tasked with getting the women ready to be fit for the king, getting them ready for their purification process. He gave her all of her things, and 7 maidens which were meet, I'm in verse 9, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he, Haggai, the eunuch, Haggai preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not showed her people. This is where we see where she's concealed her nationality. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. So obviously Mordecai, as an elder, thought that it was the best thing to do in this particular instance. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Now, whenever maid's turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purification, for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. And so we come to all of this, and we go all the way down to verse 17. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And so when we think about the providence of God, Pastor Bland asked me this morning the difference between providence and serendipity. Have you ever heard that term, serendipity? If you have, hold your hand up. Serendipity. So serendipity. So, and my response to him was that serendipity, it just seems like things just have a way of coming together. It's kind of like you're at the right place at the right time, like all things line up. But providence has purpose. Providence has purpose. And so when we talk about the providence of God in the story of Esther, the king, the Haggai granting her favor, she finding favor in Haggai's sight, the eunuch that was preparing her. When we look at how the king loved her more than all of the other virgins that came before him, when we talk about all of that, that's providence. Because all of it has purpose. It's going to come to a head with a purpose where she saves her people. And so that's a little different in my mind than serendipity. And so do you anyone have a comment on that? I saw several of you raise your hand when I asked if you had heard that term, serendipity. Do you have a thought on that? Anybody? So this response then was what the Lord wanted. Wanted Esther, he wanted her, right? He placed her there. He did that. He placed her right there in the palace so that when the right time came, that she would make the right move. That's all. That's the providence of God. And so the king, he set the royal crown upon her head. Just let you know how much he loved her. So he set the crown on her head and named her queen of the empire. And then he summoned his officials and hosted a great banquet. I just said the Persians liked a good party. They just, every opportunity, they like to party.
Let me ask you this. How can you say he loved?
That's what it says.
Well, how can they say he loved? He didn't know her.
You know what? I think, have you heard of love at first sight? Well, that must have had something to do with it.
Okay.
It must have had something to do with it. I mean, because I'm not disputing it. It says in verse 17, and the king loved Esther above all the women.
I know it's true. I loved you at first sight. You ain't love me.
That's true.
I know.
Well, I can only speak for myself. I don't know if you did or not, but I know I didn't love you.
But you just couldn't resist it.
Foolery. Okay, are you done? Okay, and so, but let's talk about that. And so you asked that. You say you're just asking that because in your mind he didn't know her. He didn't know her to love her. Okay, that's a good question. That's a good question. Jeff, did you have something? Jeff has something. Robert. Yes. Yes. Now I would not think so. I would just think that was just part of the process. They just getting ready to be in his presence. I would not think during that whole year that she would be around him like that. And so here now, okay, we see Mordecai in a position of honor and authority. Okay, we said that earlier, sitting at the king's gate. Let's go over to chapter 4, Esther chapter 4. And it looks like I think I have misspelled words in here. Y'all forgive me, because yes, I do. At the King's Gate, Gait. That's funny. Let's see, and let's look at 5 and 13.
Which one you gonna do, 4, 2, or 5, 13?
I just want you to see how he would 4 and 2. How Mordecai was in a place of authority. Okay. And it came even before the king's gate, that's 4 and 2, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. That really doesn't make sense until we come back and finish the story. Esther 5 and 13 says, yet all this availeth me nothing so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. And we're going to see that the gate was a place where official business was transacted. So it lets you know that God, again, in his providence, when we go back to let's go back to chapter 2. So Mordecai's at the king gates. This is all in God's providence, because it's going to allow Mordecai to hear the plot against the king. There is an assassination plot against the king. Okay. In chapter 2, verse 19, and when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, we just read that a minute ago, and I told you this is how it fits into the story. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Okay, so he heard that. And again, see how God just had all of that, how God just worked in all of that, everything that was played out, how God had a hand in it. When Esther told the king, she gave Mordecai the credit for uncovering that conspiracy. And this meant that his name would be written into the official chronicle of what had happened. So Mordecai, even though she gave him the credit, Mordecai received neither recognition nor reward for saving the king's life. Okay, no matter though, God saw to it that the facts were permanently recorded and he would make good use of them at the right time. And that's what we call providence. So for 4 years, things have been peaceful in Shushan. Y'all know there's a lot to be said for peace. You would know that? It's a lot to be said for peace. And I'm going to say this to you. While things are peaceful, you better enjoy it. Ain't that the truth? Because it could turn on a dime in a heartbeat. So, don't wait. Don't wait till the battle is over. You shout right now. And so things had been peaceful in Shushan. So Esther had reigned as queen. We're in Esther Chapter 3 now. She had reigned as queen, and Mordecai attended to the king's business at the gate. And then everything changed. Everything changed. And all the Jews in the empire, those who were left there, found themselves in danger of being killed just to satisfy the hatred of one man. One man. You know that hate is a horrible. It's a terrible emotion. And what you can use, you can have hate towards something and use it in a good way. But then there's a hatred that you can have that will totally destroy you and everything around you. And so Hamon had a hateful heart. He had a hateful heart. And so his hate was just so that he wanted to destroy those who had a tradition of, there was the relationship that they had with the Jews traditionally. Hamon, where he came from, his descendants, they hated the Jews. They hated the Jews. And so soon after Esther became queen, King Ahasuerus appointed Hamon as his prime minister. And again, God permitted Hamon to be appointed to this position because he had purposes to fulfill through him. Again, you don't see the name God in the book, but you see the hand of God all in it. After these things, I'm in Esther chapter 3. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Hamon, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. So Hamon, he came from a district in the empire known as Agag. He was a descendant from Agag, who was king of the Amalekites. And we're going to go back and refresh our memory where the Amalekites are concerned. So remember, when we go back, we'll see God had declared war on the Amalekites, and he wanted their name and memory blotted off the earth. It goes all the way back in the history of Israel to when they were making their exodus out of Egypt. So let's go over to Exodus, the 17th chapter. Exodus 17.
I was trying to figure out the nexus between them, but I see it now. That his folks will slow down.
His folks will low down, and just sometimes low down is just carry on. You know, it has a way of just going on. But in Exodus, the 17th chapter, we'll start at the 8th verse. Then came Amalek. Okay, Amalek, where the Amalekites descended from. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Now all they're doing is trying to make it out of Egypt to Canaan. So they're just traveling. And so Moses said unto Joshua, choose us our men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hands, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy. And they took a stone and put it under him. And he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Nobody likes to be beat. You know what I'm saying? And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. For I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now let's go over to Deuteronomy, the 25th chapter. So go to Deuteronomy, the 25th chapter, just to give you some background on why Haman's hatred for the Jews was so big, why he just hated them so much. Deuteronomy, the 25th chapter, and let's look at verse 17. And it says, remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way when ye were come forth out of Egypt, what we just read? How he met thee by the way and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Thou shalt not forget it. So just some history there.
I thought about it. I went to it. In 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter.
Mm-hmm.
You know where I'm going.
Uh-huh.
When Saul was told to wipe him out.
Yeah.
And he didn't do it.
He spared
Agag and the
best of
the livestock that he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And God said better to obey than sacrifice. But I'm thinking, you tell me if I'm connecting the dots, is that if he had done what God told him, then Hamon wouldn't have been there later on in order to try to exterminate the Jews. And the thought that come to my mind is, that if you don't deal with your issues, sooner or later they'll deal with you.
Mm-hmm.
It just has a way, and I think I'm probably one of the only people in America that often think about Bill Cosby. Just his rise to success and his phenomenal wealth and his fame and how he was idolized. And, he knew that he had an issue. But I know that when I was using drugs, I just felt like that it was some kind of way that I could do this. And, even though I seen it take many other people down, I'm going to be different, And so what I just get from that is that, you have to face. And nobody knows as well as we do what our issue is, whether it's sex or whether it's greed or whatever it is. And God is able. God is able.
Yeah, I think probably, and we can discuss this a little bit. I think one of the hardest things to do, Brother Wade, is for you to come face to face with your issues. It's a hard thing. The hard thing, what a lot of times what we'll do, Pastor, I'm just talking about myself right now, we'll explain it away. We'll come up with reasons why we do what we do.
And what I found is the only way to deal with that, because in your mind, you can always rationalize or justify why. And the only escape from that is to humble
All
yourself
right now.
and take instruction from somebody else. Because my mind is never going to leave me out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jackie, did you have something? You just fixing your hair? Okay. She's just fixing her hair. Okay. Okay. So, Hamon then, now you have to look at the picture. Remember now, Mordecai is sitting there. He's sitting there in a seat of authority. Let's look at what happens. At verse 2. And all the king's servants, I'm in chapter 3, Esther chapter 3, verse 2. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Hamon. They bowed and reverenced Hamon. Now, Hamon's not a king. Hamon is just a prime minister to the king. He's not, but they are bowing and reverencing him. For the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, it's kind of remind you of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, it says, then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Hamon to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them, now he exposes that he is a Jew. Okay? So Hamon, they're bowing and they're reverencing Hamon as prime minister. Mordecai tells them, Mordecai doesn't bow. He doesn't reverence him in that manner. He tells them that he's a Jew. And when Hamon saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Hamon full of wrath. So this just gave him even more so, the hatred even more so. When he learned that he was already arrogant, Haman's already, you only allow, like I said, you're not the king, but people bowing and reverencing you. You can't do nothing but, it can't do nothing but make your head big, okay? So then you have someone who refuses to do that. Then you learn that he's a Jew too. So Hamon learned that Mordecai was refusing to bow before him as had been commanded, and so now he puts this plan into place. In chapter 3, verse 6. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Hamon sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. Pastor Bland?
What do you do? What do you do with ignorant people? I mean, I think it's a problem all of us facing. Unless it's somebody here can say, well, they don't have to deal with ignorant people.
Say it again.
What do you do?
All right.
You know, just like a problem you had yesterday with a guy you had paid to do some work. And when you asked him why he didn't do the work, he told you should have hired somebody else. See, that right there make you want to cuss, fight, kill. Come on, y'all. Come on, y'all. People can push you. You ain't thought about Sunday school or nothing. You like, Lord Jesus, help me. Because people can say things to you that you thought that surely they won't. You know, because, I guess a mistake that I make is I feel like that if I'm respectful to you, that you're going to give me the same thing. And then when you don't, and see, I need to be prepared for that. I think we were talking about this the other night. If I can just have time to think. But if I react, my first reaction is really bad.
But you helped me so much with that yesterday because y'all, honest to God, I was not acting like your first lady.
And then part of it had to do with your money, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely it did. And not only that, but the fact that I had paid out my money. So y'all know how it is. When you pay for something, you want what you pay for. That's just that common sense right there. But you helped me in the fact of acceptance. And then another thing, Pastor Blaine, I had time to kind of think about it a little bit, and I thought about it. One thing about it is you can't control what other people do. You cannot control what other people do, but you can. You do have a little bit of control over what you do and the way you react to it. And so that really did kind of help me. I was able to go on to sleep last night. Yeah, I really was. Absolutely. Absolutely.
But he comes over to my house, and I got clumps of grass everywhere. If it's paper, he'll cut right over the paper. But he won't do that to sing.
Right. And so
my money spent just like hers.
And so in your mind you have a right to tell him what you want because you're paying for it. Exactly, and I get that. So in chapter 3, and we're going to close here. We'll pick up here next Sunday. Okay, Pastor.
Another thing that I shared with you was, I said, and you said we're talking about dealing with ignorant people, is I asked Lady Deborah, I said, well, what is your part in it? And your part is that you engaged with him. You fool with him. And I've got a conviction right now in my life at 64 years old and having been taught at Manasseh for 15 years, is that I can do without anybody. If you causing me grief in my life, if you causing me emotional pain and whatever, I need to let you go. You know?
Yeah.
And I could see earlier in my life that I thought I had to have folk. You know, I don't feel that way today, Curtis. If if it ain't working, I ain't mad at you. You go your way, I'm going mine. That's the best way for me to handle it, because if I keep on, and part of my problem was, Lady Deborah, somewhere in my mind, I thought I could change people. I don't believe that no more. You 30, 35, even if you 15, even if you 17 months, if this how you are, that's how you are, and I just need to respect that and move on. You probably need to get you a new yard, man.
Okay, all right. Okay, you know what? I think we're just going to stop right here, and we'll pick up with Hamon going to the king with his plot to kill the Jews. We'll pick up there next Sunday. And so we'll just have a little extra break between now and the rest of the service. Give the Lord a hand. Praise everybody.